From the Credit Union National Association, this is the CUNA News Podcast. Credit union people, credit union ideas. Women continue to hold the top leadership position at credit unions. 51% of credit union CEOs are women, according to Women in Credit Union Leadership, a report from CUNA. I'm Jennifer Plager, Managing Editor with CUNA News. I recently spoke with Leigh Brady, CEO at 50 Billion Assets State Employees Credit Union in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Linda White, Executive Director at the Credit Union Women's Leadership Alliance. During our conversation, they spoke about their journeys to the CEO chair, challenges they faced, what sets female leaders apart, advice they have for women who aspire to take on a leadership role, and more. Leigh, Linda, thank you and welcome to the CUNA News Podcast. Why don't we start with an easy one, and let's just tell me a little bit about your background and what you do now and how you got to where you are today. Linda, let's start with you.
So I'm Linda White. I'm the Executive Director of the Credit Union Women's Leadership Alliance. The acronym is pronounced CULA. I know that's a lot of people kind of flipped over how you say it. I actually started out in credit unions when I was 18 years old. And so I grew up in the credit union world. I left for a brief period of time, and I recently retired as the CEO of a credit union in Northern California, Upward Credit Union. So, I used to work at a passport studio, and the CEO of the credit union in the federal building saw me and asked me to come and interview. And on day one, I was promoted from a receptionist to a teller. So I will say, when people talk about challenging things, I will say that I had, back and then you had cash, lots and lots of cash. And I was short $100 twice in 3 months. And I got suspended for a week and had to pay the money back, which is like, never would that ever happen in today's world. And I remember I was young, I was 18. I remember going to my brother and crying. And I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? And he says, you've got to go back. If you don't go back, they'll think you stole the money. So if I hadn't gotten that sage advice at the age of 18, I would not be where I am today, because I worked my way up to CEO and was CEO of my credit union for almost 25 years.
Some good advice from your brother.
Yeah.
And Leigh, what about your story?
My story that I tell is that I started when I was 12, but why? No, I started at SECU in 1987, straight out of NC State University. And I started as an accountant in our accounting department and moved my way through the organization in a variety of jobs. The joke is I couldn't hold a position, I guess. So I spent about 5 years in our accounting department and then moved to audit and spent about 7 years there, and then moved to loan admin and started a secondary marketing department, and then was asked to start a consumer education group. And then they started piling on other things. And then I got HR. That's always fun. And then I moved into the COO position, so the Chief Operating Officer. And then I've been in the CEO role a whopping total of 5 months now. But overall, obviously 36 years at the organization. And I can just tell you, extremely humbled to be in this position I am today.
It sounds like you both have great stories, and I'm excited to chat with you a little bit about what you've learned along your journeys and how that helped you and what kind of advice you have for others. Because it sounds like you two are folks who have a lot of advice that people would find valuable. So part of the reason I wanted to chat with you today is that CUNA recently released an update to their issue on women's leadership in credit unions, and the research found that 51% of credit union CEOs and 36% of board members are females. And those are bigger numbers than in, like, say, banks, where it's, I think, 4% CEOs and 23% of board members are female. So why do you think it is that credit unions just have more women in these big leadership type roles?
Well, I'll start that one. And I'll tell you from my perspective, I think that credit unions historically have been a lot more inclusive than traditional banks. And I also think that from the standpoint of small, and this might relate more to a community bank than a larger bank, but smaller institutions, just like Linda was talking about. Linda grew up in that credit union.
Yeah.
And I think that is the story for quite a number of small credit unions, of where you've done every single job in that credit union. And so you know it inside and out. And so I think that from the standpoint of giving folks a chance, credit unions historically give females probably more opportunities than males, in my opinion. And it comes down to inclusivity.
Linda, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think like Leigh said, growing up in the credit union, many of our members of CULA have grown up in the credit union world. And I think, is it a matter of women tend to be nurturers and they'll do whatever it takes? That's not to say that there aren't men that aren't nurturers too, but more of our credit union CEOs from the smaller credit unions have grown up with the credit union. I mean, the credit union I was at was 3 million when I started there, and it grew to 100 million. And it's doing anything it'll take to get the job done and helping your community. So I think the growing up part is like a true statement. I mean, through and through. Absolutely.
And you both talk about, growing up in the small credit unions, but at the same time, we're seeing a little bit of that struggle with the larger institutions, the bigger ones. Leigh, you're kind of, you've broken through that. You've broken through that glass ceiling. You grew from, the big ones. Why do you think that kind of, quote, glass ceiling kind of exists in some of the larger credit unions that are out there for women?
Yeah, I'll just tell you that from the historic perspective of larger financial institutions, and credit unions are in that space as well, they were traditionally led by men. And so, sometimes you were led by that, but the next level down and the next level down, they were also men. And so as you looked at the female, and look, I go back from the HR perspective, I can go way back, and I can tell you that 20 some odd years ago in our credit union, even our I guess demographic shift, we had 86% female. And I mean, unbelievable amount of female. But we had one female leader. One. And that was an issue. It really was. And I know that it's Sue Douglas, and probably a lot of folks know Sue. So, because she's done a heck of a lot in the industry, and she's retired now, but I think she set the stage for quite a number of other females to have opportunities. But when you're looking at someone who is a peer and like-minded and looks like you and acts like you, from the male perspective, for female, it's hard to break in and break through that barrier. So, we at our organization, I think are specifically very, I'm appreciative of Sue breaking that ceiling here into management, because it has afforded others the opportunity. Now we are about 65% female in our organization, but then look at our leadership team. And from the leadership standpoint, I have 8 direct reports to me, 4 female, 4 male. So it's a good balance. And up until recently, our board was primarily female. So we've come a long ways. So, and I know that's a cliche term, but we have.
What do you think, Linda?
It's just, when I'm listening to Leigh, it's kind of like the glass ceiling. It's obviously like her glass ceiling is a little bigger than our glass ceiling. I think for female leaders, it's coming to the table and showing up. It's that glass ceiling. It's like, how do you walk into a room? I remember walking into a circle of men at a conference, a very large conference that we all go to, and having somebody say, I just met them, and 5 minutes later, we're in a circle of men that I know, and somebody says, "Oh, hi, I'm so and so. Nice to meet you." And it's like, how do you stand up? And I'm proud that I said, "Yes, I know. I just met you 5 minutes ago." Like to really stand up and show up and it's okay to how, like you said, how do you show up and be an equal?
Yeah. And Linda, to your point there, you've probably experienced some of the same things where you're in a group, all men, and they're all shaking each other's hands.
Yeah.
And then you come in and they're like, "Hi, Leigh, how are you?"
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, "I'm great," and I'm shaking their hand.
Yeah. Yep.
So, and it's showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And Leigh, you've talked about how it's starting to be, we're starting to see women in these roles, and that's a good thing. And Linda, you talk about, well, what do women have to do to get there? And it's showing up, but what else do they need to do to find themselves in that leadership position and get through that ceiling?
It is the showing up, but it's like, how do you talk to like-minded people? So that's one of the reasons CULA was formed. Like, how do you have that safe space to say, I don't know what I don't know? And to how do you know to show up and not be classified as an ugly word? One of the things that we provide our members is that safe space of communication. And I've been on other platforms where I've seen people pose a question and the response is, why didn't you? Or the board only has one employee, that's the CEO, and that's your decision. And the person responding was not a female. And then I see those same conversations occurring with our members now. And I just sit back and smile. It reminds me why at a retirement, I'm the executive director and I love what I'm doing, is to be able to see these women supporting each other it makes me emotional to say, how can I help you? I'm sorry you're going through that. Have you thought about the language? And it's to be better. It's not about wanting to attack each other. It's about how do we all collectively be better to do what we need to do? It's kind of like the egos are kind of out of the room. So I think really finding a mentor, finding a network, and ways to improve yourself and your leadership. And what, like you said, you don't know what you don't know, but how do you find what that is?
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Linda. And I'll just tell you from my perspective, what I see sometimes is women are trying to change who they are, sometimes to fit in. And I would always, I caution folks, just be you. Yeah. Be confident in who you are as a female and what you bring to the table. And having those open lines of obviously communication and that confidence, that's tough sometimes in given environments. But as you indicate, I do think it's getting better. I do think with mentorship, I do think with support networks, I think that we're going to all be where we need to be. In the end, we're making great progress.
I like that, talking of, creating a place of safety where you can talk amongst, bounce ideas and problems and issues off of each other and not feel like she doesn't know what she's doing kind of thing. I like that idea of that and that supporting of each other. I think that's super important for any person, but I mean, especially women, I think. So what, and this is going to sound like a weird question coming from me, what makes a female a great leader in your minds? Why should hiring committees or selection committees consider a female? What do they bring to the table that maybe a man doesn't?
Okay, I'm going out on a limb here. No, we are fabulous multitaskers.
I was just going to say the same thing, multitasking.
I mean, it is. And, I think that you guys talked a little, on the nurturing side. Linda, you mentioned that earlier, the empathy side, the fact that, and especially women, I mean, if you've ever had kids too, you are used to dealing with the unknown at any point in time. And I think that all of those traits mixed together, they make for a fabulous leader. And then from the standpoint of the collaborative nature of women, I think they're very collaborative. And I've been through a lot of CEOs. In a 36-year career, I've already worked for 4 CEOs. And I think that quite often women are able just to listen, to observe, to learn, and absorb what someone is doing really well and that is well received, and then what someone just does very poorly as a leader. And I think that we take all of that information, we absorb it, but then we work to mold ourselves into what we think may be the best leader. And quite often, I find that women are very good at maybe emulating the type of leader that they would want to work for.
Linda, what do you think?
So Leigh took my word. It's not my word. So when members apply for CULA, one of the things we ask them is, what is your superpower? And I will say multitasking is probably the number one thing that is said. Other ones that come to mind is connectors. That's what I call myself. So when I put what is my superpower, I say I'm a connector. And it's just really resiliency comes up. And I think that's a learned behavior of how to be resilient and not coil up and shy away. So I tell people I'm a shy extrovert. Now they laugh and they roll off their seats, but that's the reality. And it's right. And it kind of goes back to that showing up to not to have that confidence and to not feel like you're less than, like you don't belong there. But I think it's I would say multitasking, resiliency, and all those other things that Leigh mentioned, empathy. But yeah, the resiliency and not afraid to do whatever it takes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's like Leigh said, one day they might be changing a baby diaper. The next day they're coming to credit union to empty the garbage, and there's nothing that's beneath them. I mean, like I said, I can't, I'm not a man, so I can't say that for a man. And but I used to have my boss before me would come in at 10 and leave at 3 because he was the contractor on his remodel. And it's I'm there at 7 and I leave at 6. And, not that I need to be there that long, but, we'll do what it needs to take, what you need to do. But I really think it's got to go back to all the things that we've said. They kind of all dovetail, showing up, don't be afraid of your own shadow, having a safe space to kind of know, it's interesting to hear more often than not that, gosh, I'm not the only one. Right. And to hear Leigh say going into a room of people and, everybody just saying, oh, hi, instead of just shaking, you're another CEO. Right.
Have female leaders, have they changed in the past, 3-4 years, given the environments that we've been in, the pandemic and virtual and hybrid and remote and in office? And have they had to change or have they changed for better or worse?
Oh, I'll just tell you one of the things that scares me a little bit is the survey data that's showing women that are moving out of the workforce. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean for the future of women in leadership? Because, I think that the pandemic, obviously, when it changed a lot of things for us. And foundationally, it changed families in a big way. Mm-hmm. And so I do worry a little bit about that for the future. Now, for the ones who have stayed in the workforce, I do think that the more women that are going to be put in CEO positions or high leadership positions, C-suite positions, are inspiring. I can tell you that I grossly underestimated the impact that me being named as the first female CEO of this credit union would mean to a lot of our female team members. And as I go across the state and I meet and talk with a lot of our team members, I am incredibly humbled by the support and the messages of inspiration that they say just being named and them watching my journey has meant to them. So, and look, I'm just Leigh. And I will work my tail off in whatever job that I'm going to be doing. It's just like Linda said, it's nothing if I'm here when the housekeeping folks are coming in and I'm lifting my trash can to help out here. It's just what we do. So I've never really, thought it would just be as impactful. But I think the more that you have those types of stories in credit unions, then I think the more it'll spur on potential future leaders, let's say. What do you think, Linda?
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you said, I'm just Leigh, because I think that's I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be on a podcast with Leigh Brady. And it's kind of like, and somebody says, Leigh is amazing. Just you're fine. And I think one of the things is even at, I ran $100 million credit union, but the reality of it is no matter how small or how large a credit union is, as you've grown in your career, to take the time to stop and kind of go, I have something to give and to pay it forward. And I think that's right. That is like why CULA was formed. Lily New Farmer is like, that was her brainchild, but it's really, I get to now navigate that. Not all of our members are the Lily New Farmers and Maria Martinez of the world. We have people that are like, they're just starting out. And man, where was this when I was a CEO 20 years ago? That's the other thing we hear. Where was this when I started out? To have that vulnerability of, gosh, we have people that are CEOs for 2 weeks. I mean, I have somebody that wants to be part of our coaching program and has asked me 3 times, and she'll now be CEO in January. She now can be part of our coaching program. So wow. the hunger, we've created that platform of to have that hunger and desire. But if nothing more, that's where I keep sticking with it, is because paying it forward. And as we have members that are retiring saying, you know what, you can still give.
Amen.
Yeah.
And Lily and I were in the same DE class and the same group together. Best class, best group.
We were the D-lighters. I'm just saying. That's the best team name ever. Okay.
You both talked about, giving back and the impact that you've had. You've heard from other folks who have said, seeing you in the positions that you're in, how you've been inspirational a little bit. That kind of segues into another question that I had of what kind of advice would you give for young women or middle-aged women or any woman who wants to be in a high-level leadership role, or even, mid-manager level, who just wants to take on some of that leadership responsibility? What advice would you have for them?
Find a coaching program. There's no shortage of free coaching programs out there being offered from CULA. There's the executive readiness from the Global Women's Leadership Network. There's so many leagues that are collaboratively coming together and offering leadership programs. So basically get out from behind your desk, whatever that looks like. And I think, I was a coach on the one-to-one women leaders, and to be able to be a mentor there, to see that we have a future of women that really are bright and want to know, and to be able to just like find something there is a way out there to find some type of leadership. I have people that like apply that aren't eligible, and I refer them to Global Women's, or I refer them to their leagues. There's no shortage. CUNA has like a mentoring program. There's a mentor match. So
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, the other thing that I would say is don't give up. And I say that from the personal perspective, because my journey to CEO, it certainly has not been an easy one. And the fact is that 7 years ago, when our long-term CEO was retiring, I applied for the job. And, and look, I'd never applied for a CEO job before. Went through the whole process, thought I did pretty well. And when it came down to it, they hired our CFO, who had been here 40 years. And I completely understood why. He had been here longer. And so he was here 5 years. And then it came time, the job was up again in 21. And I had to do some soul searching, because from the standpoint of confidence, when we talk about confidence, in my mind, I was doing the same job that I was doing 5 years earlier. Now I had gone out and I was doing some more leadership things at the state, at the league level, CUNA, things like that from the council standpoint. But I thought if they didn't want me 5 years ago, why would they want me now? And I had to do soul searching. And finally, I came to the realization that if I didn't try again, that I would always have that, I wonder what would have happened if. And I didn't want to live with that for the rest of my life. What if? So I applied again. And I went through the whole process, and it was a lot more cumbersome this time, right? In 21. And it came down to it. And there was one from the outside, and there was me, and they hired the one from the outside. And let me tell you, I was incredibly disappointed. I was. And the reason that they did was because he had been a CEO somewhere already, and because he had been through some technology changes, and we needed some of that at our organization. But the one thing that I can tell you is that he asked me to take on the role of chief operating officer. And, I could have taken a step back and said, no, I'm going somewhere else. All right. But I chose to learn more, and I chose to stick my neck out there and learn some additional things that I didn't know. And when he decided less than 2 years later, this wasn't the place for him, the board came to me, and unanimously they wanted me to be the CEO. And that happened in July. And so there's always a reason for things. My mother used to call them opportunities in life. And sometimes opportunities work out, and sometimes they don't. But in addition to that network and that support team, you will have to stick your neck out there, and you will not always succeed. And so you got to be ready for heartbreak, sometimes in the midst of the climb, because it's not always pretty. I know that's a sour note to end on. I'm sorry.
No.
No, I mean, I was just thinking to myself, about how impactful lessons you can learn from stuff that doesn't necessarily go your way, that you can take a little bit of something out of even the darkest kind of moment out there. As cheesy kind of as that sounds, but
if I didn't have the darkness, I would not see the light now.
There you go.
Exactly. So great advice for all women. Anything particularly for some of those young professionals who are out there, who are maybe just starting their careers or trying to figure out what they want to do, or any advice for young professional women?
Okay, I can tell you what, this is the advice I give. And look, I give this to women. I give this to young men. And I've spoken to some leadership classes at some universities, and like, I can tell you, great grades are wonderful. They're wonderful, and they will probably get you into an organization. But when you get into that credit union or whatever discipline you're going to study, all right, and you get in that company, to me, there are two things that are going to make you stand out, and that is work ethic. And then Linda talked about that earlier, and the adaptability to change, because the world is changing so drastically now. And specifically for women, I say you just got to work harder. You do. Sometimes it takes that, and it takes that to be noticed. And you might be taking on something that is not in that traditional job description, but it is in that one line that says all other duties as assigned, which accommodates a lot of stuff, right? But it's you taking on things like that kind of elevate your visibility within an organization, and sometimes can be really well worth it.
Linda, what advice do you have?
You when we were in school, it's like find the buddy system. Who is that person? And you said, not being afraid and not thinking you need to know everything, but being open to learn. It's also, and when it's like, there was no job, like I said, growing up in the Caribbean, there was no job I didn't do. But, it's also having that person that sees something in you, just let them push you. And so find that person. I mean, if I named the people that helped open doors and push me through them in my career, we'd be on here for an hour. So I didn't do it alone. I didn't do it alone, but because I was insecure and didn't think I knew. But the reality of it is, more than you probably think you know. You don't need to know the whole thing before you take a step to learn.
Anything we haven't talked about that you want to mention before we wrap up for the day?
I think Linda touched on the giving back And to the extent that women can out there, I think giving back in the credit union industry is incredibly important for women specifically. So, volunteer for that committee and CUNA councils. Volunteer to be a mentor to someone. Organize some type of effort. Go meet with the legislator from the advocacy standpoint.
Right.
But just make yourself visible and give back. Because I think that there's a bright future for women in our industry. And it's a pretty exciting time. It is.
Never give up. Remember, one of the things I always said to my credit union was, what is your why? What is your why? And also, what can you do? It's not what you can't do. It's what you can do. And what is your why? Why do you wake up and go to work in the morning? Think about that person you help. And I don't know, it's just all encompassing. I think everything that we said is it's like doing the right thing. It's what do they say? Everything you ever needed to know, you learned in kindergarten.
Thanks for listening to the CUNA News Podcast. Subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.